The day of the school festival had arrived, and that morning Megumi was searching everywhere for Tomoya. Even checked the audio-visual room, but he was nowhere to be found. He had realized that the script written by Utaha was almost identical to the one in the book Metronome of Love. She tried to contact Tomoya and find him, wanting to convey that his decision regarding the script was very significant to Utaha. Megumi wondered if Tomoya understood this yet. She ran his school rooftop and sure enough saw Tomoya and Utaha arguing. Utaha was asking why Tomoya still couldn't understand her. She seemed screwy that she grabbed his collar, not wanting to hear what he was saying because it wasn't addressing her question. Utaha was furious that Tomoya was only seeing things superficially. After witnessing, Megumi quickly left. That afternoon, Tai and Utaha talked in a maid cafe. Tomoya told Utaha they had two main problems. First, as the story reached its climax, Utaha's script started to resemble a novel because it had too many explanations of each character's expressions and thoughts. This aspect clearly disrupted the game's pacing. Since the game already had ES and other supporting elements, there was no need to write explanations for things that were already evident. According to Tomoya, such as was actually distracting. Utaha thought that Tomoya meant would be better to omit those words from the game. Tomoya explained that in a visual, the story progresses as the player presses the continue button, and if nothing changes after pressing it, it doesn't involve the player in the story, which would ruin the game itself. Just as Tomoya was about to discuss second issue, Utaha, annoyed, interrupted him. She said that Tomoya wasn't just avoiding her question, but was also trying to oppose her, noting that he had become quite bold. Tomoya firmly stated that he wasn't up Utaha or belittling her work, but since it was a script for a game, Utaha slammed the table, startling the wasp who was bringing their food. Utaha said that wasn't the issue she was calling about. Tomoya also slammed the table, surprising the staff. He asked what Utaha's problem was, stating that game was a collaborative effort where everyone poured their heart and soul into making it. He confirmedly said that the script couldn't be the story was indeed amazing, but its delivery was the problem. Tomoya also admitted that he was really angry at Hit for realizing it too late. His words brought tears to Utaha's eyes. Tomoya begged her forgiveness. Utaha remained silent, continued to cry, making Tomoya more panicked as all the cafe patrons watched them. Tomoya and Utaha continued their conversation outside the Tomoya said that it wasn't Utaha's fault, but his own as the dyer, and he hadn't realized it because he had only been reading from text files. His perspective was clouded by the incredible story, especially the second part, which felt more like a novel, so the script wasn't suitable for a game. Tomoya assured her not to worry because there was still time to fight. He pleaded with Utaha to revise the script, but if she was unwilling, Moya would do it himself, even if it might lower the story's quality, because he was the director. Even if Utaha insisted on doing it, Tomoya would still proceed. That night, Tomoya started working on the script. Meanwhile, Megumi called Eriri and told her about Utaha's script needing a rewrite, and that Tomoya was going to fix it himself. Eriri asked about Utaha's situation. Megumi mentioned that Utaha was in Tomoya's room. Megumi was surprised that Eriri didn't react with her usual concern for the two of them. Eriri was confident that nothing would happen between them since one was busy fixing the script and the other had just had her script rejected. Eriri could understand Utaha's feelings as a creator whose work had been turned down. She said that it wasn't the time for her to worry about others because she would have a lot to do later, so for now, Eriri needed to finish her tasks as quickly as possible. Megumi then asked if Eriri wasn't attending the school festival or participating in the Miss Takoyaki contest that year, especially since Eriri had won it the previous year. However, Eriri replied that precisely because she had won last year, she had a reason not to participate this year. That night, Utaha woke up in Tomoya's room and saw him asleep in front of his computer. She covered him with a blanket and immediately began working on the script revisions. The next morning, Tomoya suddenly woke up, feeling panicked because he had fallen asleep. Utaha greeted him and said that the timing was perfect because she had almost finished reviewing the script revisions. Utaha explained that she tried to understand Tomoya's opinions while checking the parts that needed improvement. She had also marked sections she disagreed with or found clearly wrong, corrected missing words and typos, and added comments in several areas. Utaha then invited him to start the discussion. Tomoya was astonished to see so many revisions. Utaha mentioned that her award-winning debut manuscript had received twice as many revision notes from Mr. Mashida, and that it took about 2 years to reduce the notes to double digits. Utaha stated that writing isn't an easy job, so it's impossible for the first draft of her script for the game to be perfect right away. They began the revisions with Tomoya showing some text and dialogue to be included in the game. Utaha realized that light dialogue would be incorporated into the game, and she was confident she could finish it in a day. However, according to Tomoya, that wasn't necessary. Utaha only needed to review the revisions he had made. Utaha said that revising that part wasn't difficult, but the problem was incorporating both scripts into the game, especially since the two scripts had different story directions. Meguri's route had an action-adventure theme, while Ruri's route was a tragic romance. In Meguri's route, the story returned to the present time, whereas in Ruri's route, it depicted wandering aimlessly forever. In Meguri's route, everyone except Ruri ended up happy, but in Ruri's route, only Ruri and the protagonist found a small happiness. Utaha said that if Tomoya wanted to include both scripts in the game, the theme would become chaotic. Tomoya responded that Utaha was thinking like a novelist again, whereas having many mixed themes with unpredictable story directions was one of the strengths of dating simulation games. Tomoya mentioned two rules in dating simulation games. First, the female protagonist must be cute, and second, the game shouldn't be bound by rigid rules. Utaha then asked if the game Tomoya was making had the freedom to choose one of two routes with different story directions. However, Utaha's assumption was wrong. Tomoya said there would be 3 routes, with the third route being a beautiful ending where both Meguri and Ruri remained alive and found their respective happiness. Utaha called Tomoya foolish for adding another route in the middle of development that had to be completed by that weekend. If the script wasn't finished by Monday, Iriri would struggle to create the illustrations. Utaha then asked why, if that was the case, Tomoya was doing something so ridiculous. It turned out that Tomoya was doing it because Utaha had made both female protagonists too compelling. Tomoya himself didn't know why he wanted both characters to live happily ever after. Maybe it was different from Yutaka Kasumi's previous works, but he just couldn't imagine a story where all the characters he loved didn't get to find happiness. Utaha admitted that writing like that wasn't her style, and because of that, she couldn't do it. If Tomoya really wanted to make that story, then why didn't he write it himself? Utaha said that maybe a creator shouldn't say something like that to their director, but between fellow creators, it shouldn't be a problem. Since it was Tomoya's ridiculous idea, he should be the one to write it himself. Tomoya then asked if Utaha was really okay with him inserting his lousy script into hers. Utaha told him not to be so self-deprecating because parts of his writing were already in her script. Besides, the rule was that it shouldn't be restricted by rigid conventions. After writing for half a day, Tomoya showed his work to Utaha and asked for her opinion. Utaha was surprised that he had written so much in just half a day, admitting that Tomoya was quite fast. She then sat in his chair and started reviewing his writing. There were so many things that needed fixing, from sections that were complete garbage, like some dialogues that didn't properly convey the characters' backgrounds, to inconsistencies in personality, emotions, and relationships. There were also plenty of boring sentences that had no real meaning. At first, Utaha had given Tomoya a chance to write because he had been bold enough to criticize her script. But in the end, his writing was nothing more than amateur work. Tomoya realized that meant he had to rewrite everything. Utaha told him to write as much as he could, and once everything was written down, they would revise it together. If they kept redoing everything while writing, they'd never finish. If none of his writing could be used, Utaha would help him as much as possible. She declared that with her own 2 hands, she would turn Tomoya into a great writer. That night, Tomoya worked hard to complete his script while Utaha soaked in his bathtub. As she bathed, she found herself crying as she remembered her conversation with Tomoya on the school rooftop. After finishing her bath, Utaha asked how far Tomoya had gotten. He told her he had reached the scene of Ruri's farewell. Utaha then sat in Tomoya's chair. Tomoya asked what she thought about giving players the option to chase after Ruri. Unfortunately, Utaha was too sleepy to think at that moment. Tomoya told her to get some rest, and Utaha asked him to wake her up in 2 hours. Before going to sleep, she unbuttoned her shirt on purpose. Not long after, Tomoya grabbed a blanket to cover her, but the moment he saw her exposed skin, he immediately screamed in shock. The next morning, neither Tomoya nor Utaha attended the school festival events and only showed up for the bonfire. That morning, Utaha asked Tomoya if a neatly wrapped up ending like that really existed. She didn't want to say it, but she felt that Ruri didn't deserve happiness because she was too obsessive. She even eliminated Meguri and the other female protagonists just to have the main protagonist for herself. However, Tomoya actually liked that side of Ruri. Utaha then asked if he liked Ruri more than Meguri. Tomoya replied that he liked both of them because they were both special heroines. He said that Meguri and Ruri fought over the protagonist, got jealous, and made everyone laugh and get frustrated. Wasn't that the kind of unpredictable ending everyone wanted to see? Utaha admitted that it was absurd, but she wanted to see it too. Tomoya then apologized to Utaha for ruining her script, changing the characters' personalities and backstories. Utaha, however, said that even though her characters were changed so they could live, they were not dead. They were alive, crying, laughing, and loved by everyone. Playing the game made Utaha happy, excited, and thrilled. The script wasn't just written by someone else, nor was it solely hers or Tomoya's, it was their original final scenario. Hearing that, Tomoya was so moved that he couldn't hold back his tears. That night, there was a bonfire event at the school. Since the script was finally completed, Utaha decided to attend. That evening, she met Megumi and told her that her job was done now that the script was finished. She handed the rest over to Megumi because she had to focus on completing her novel. Megumi then asked if Ruri was actually Seiyuka from Metronome of Love since she had read both stories. Utaha confirmed that Ruri and Seiyuka were indeed based on the same person, because the author was inexperienced and antisocial, only capable of drawing inspiration from things close to her. Ruri was a strong-willed, cruel woman who was also lonely. Utaha admitted that she had hoped Ruri would be the one chosen by the protagonist. Before Megumi left, Utaha told her that it wasn't too late. She was sure Megumi could turn the stubborn protagonist into someone better. Utaha then urged Megumi to take action. That night, Tomoya found himself stranded at the bonfire event, surrounded by couples dancing together. Feeling out of place, he quickly tried to leave the crowd. Just then, he heard a voice calling him Big Brother. Tomoya turned around to see Megumi addressing him, telling him not to leave Ruri all alone like that. Megumi approached him and said that she was Ruri, the one who had been calling out to Tomoya for years. She then took his hand and told him that at that moment, she was both Ruri and Seiyuka. As she led him into a dance, Utaha and Eriri watched them from a distance. Eriri, inspired by the scene, immediately started sketching them as they danced together. That day, Megumi was in the back courtyard of the school with a male student. It seemed like the male student was confessing his love to Megumi. Tomoya, Utaha, and Eriri were observing from a distance. Tomoya was utterly shocked by what he saw. According to Utaha, based on Tomoya's possessive reaction when a romantic rival appeared, he was the type of protagonist with a weak mindset. If Tomoya were to say that he had only just realized his feelings for Megumi, it would mean his level of hopelessness had doubled. Tomoya quickly told Utaha to be quiet because he wanted to try and listen to their conversation. From what they could see, it seemed like Megumi rejected the male student as he walked away with his head down. That afternoon, Tomoya, Utaha, Eriri, and Megumi gathered in the audiovisual room for a meeting. Utaha commented that Megumi was indeed somewhat attractive, but she had never stood out much. However, thanks to the acting training she had given Megumi and the outfits Eriri had chosen for her, she was starting to look more like a true female protagonist. Because of that, it was no surprise that male students had started showing interest in her. Tomoya, on the other hand, hadn't planned on introducing her to the public until the game was released during the Winter Comiket, but he hadn't expected her progress to be this significant already. Megumi, however, expressed her displeasure at Tomoya and Utaha interfering in her personal matters and making decisions so openly on her behalf. Utaha then asked why Megumi rejected the male student's confession. Megumi admitted that if she were to start dating, she would be busy going on dates every weekend. The problem was that they were about to enter the final phase of the game's development, which meant she would be completely occupied. There were still scripts to complete, testing to be done, promotions to handle, and preparations for the event. She simply wouldn't have the time to think about anything else until the Winter Comiket arrived. Tomoya was deeply moved by Megumi's dedication. However, Utaha immediately pushed his head down and told him that while she completely understood Megumi's passion for their game development, if the illustrations weren't finished by the deadline, their participation in the Winter Comiket would remain just a dream. Eriri then asked whether the writer and director, who had delayed finishing the script and even added a new route, had anything to say about it. Hearing Eriri's sarcasm, Tomoya immediately dropped to his knees and apologized. Utaha stated that they had already rescheduled everything, yet Eriri was still lagging behind. If they were following the schedule properly, Eriri should have finished her work already, even with the addition of a new route. Eriri, however, defended herself, saying she hadn't yet found the perfect image for the female protagonist. Megumi then apologized to her. Utaha questioned whether that was truly the reason Eriri was struggling, pointing out that Eriri had been overly fixated on quality, to the point where a lot of time had been wasted. Eriri became frustrated, feeling as though her efforts had been in vain. Utaha clarified that she didn't mean it that way, but the reality was that the time spent didn't match the actual results. Tensions escalated as Utaha and Eriri began arguing. Tomoya quickly stepped in to break it up, saying that if they were going to get angry, they should take it out on him as the director instead. He reassured Eriri, saying that he believed in her ability to finish the work. Utaha, however, remained skeptical, since this was Eriri's first time drawing illustrations for a game. But Tomoya remained firm in his belief, pointing out that Eriri had completed many works as a manga artist. Hearing Tomoya's words, Eriri was touched. Tomoya continued, saying that in all her past projects, Eriri had always completed them, and her manga releases had always gone smoothly. He even called her an outstanding creator who would surely deliver results that met expectations. Utaha, looking irritated at Tomoya's praises, watched as Eriri regained her enthusiasm and promised that she would complete the work. No matter what, she vowed to meet the deadline. Tomoya remarked that they had ended up in this situation because he had always placed his trust in Eriri. Eriri swore she would finish the work, deciding to isolate herself until she completed everything. She even went as far as skipping school just to focus on her work. Tomoya was baffled by how the situation had gotten so extreme. By his calculations based on her usual pace, Eriri should have finished already. Eriri simply replied that she had a lot riding on this. She then bid farewell and promised to update Tomoya via phone every day. Finally, Tomoya agreed to wait for her. Before she left, Tomoya asked one last time to make sure. Would she really come back and not just disappear? Eriri reassured him once again before leaving. On Monday afternoon, Tomoya, Megumi, and Utaha met at a cafe. Tomoya told them about Eriri going to a villa to be alone for a while. Utaha, however, said that Eriri wouldn't come back, which made Tomoya even more worried. Megumi was also very concerned about Eriri staying alone at the villa. Tomoya reassured them that Eriri would be fine since he had been to that villa before and there was a convenience store nearby. However, Utaha argued that the real issue was not about the location but the fact that leaving a creator under a tight deadline alone in the middle of the woods was a major mistake for a director. Tomoya explained that Eriri had gone there to meet her deadline. Utaha called him naive, saying his decision was as bad as giving overly sweet ice cream to a diabetic. Tomoya even showed them the message Eriri had sent the day before, where she updated him on her condition and sent 2 image files. Megumi felt more reassured, and Tomoya added that the deadline was still a week away. Utaha warned that this was only the beginning. She had heard a story from her editor friend Sunoko about the typical signs of a creator trying to escape from their work, and she advised Tomoya to be cautious. The first stage was that their words became harsher. The second stage involved self-blame. The third stage saw increasingly delayed replies. The fourth stage was when they started saying things like wanting to die or not being able to go on, and the fifth stage was when they would completely cut off contact. There was even a sixth stage where some creators disappeared, only to be found later working under a new pen name alongside another man on a different project. So in the end, the man they left behind didn't need to worry too much. The key takeaway was that if Tomoya started noticing these signs in Eriri's messages, he had to be on alert. Megumi then asked how long Eriri planned to stay there. Tomoya expected her to return before the deadline on Monday morning. After leaving the cafe, Megumi suggested they visit Eriri in Nasukojin on Saturday, planning to stay overnight and bring her back together. Tomoya immediately pointed out the awkwardness of Megumi, suggesting that a guy stay overnight with 2 girls. Megumi casually reminded him that during their previous training camp, one guy had played around with 4 girls and no one had minded. Tomoya, however, declined, saying he had his own deadline to meet. Megumi understood and decided to cancel her plan, opting instead to help Tomoya with his work over the weekend. Tomoya gratefully thanked her. Megumi then joked that it was strange how different girls kept staying over at a guy's place every week, making her even more curious about his social circle. On Tuesday, Eriri contacted Tomoya and sent him an illustration she had completed. Tomoya was surprised that she only sent one. Eriri had successfully finished Ruri's route and was now working on the main route that Tomoya had written. According to Eriri, Tomoya's scenario had a different tone compared to the other routes, which required a distinct approach to both line art and coloring. Because of this, her progress might be slower from that point onward. Tomoya was shocked to hear this but decided to wait patiently until Eriri was satisfied with her work. That day, Tomoya sat with Utaha in the school courtyard, updating her on Eriri's progress. Utaha had already predicted that leaving Eriri alone had been a huge mistake. However, Tomoya still had faith in Eriri, who had never abandoned a project before. Utaha once again reminded Tomoya that the first stage was starting to speak harshly, and that night, Eriri was likely to enter the second stage. Tomoya said that things were still fine yesterday even if she had only completed one page. Utaha responded that if an artist had stopped drawing, then it was over. Besides, Tomoya had no idea when Eriri would be able to draw again, especially since she had mentioned wanting to change her drawing style. In reality, artists are at their most vulnerable when trying something new. Utaha understood exactly what Eriri was going through. Suddenly, Utaha remembered that she still hadn't figured out the plot for her new light novel. She regretted choosing a school harem setting and thought it would have been better to go with a simple young romance story instead. Tomoya told her that he was really looking forward to her new series. He was confident that everything would be fine and that Eriri wouldn't give up. He believed she had already calculated everything. He was sure that Eriri would meet her deadline with her usual art style. Utaha dismissed his words, saying that this wasn't a matter of faith, it was simply the attitude of someone who had no expectations. She then asked if Tomoya saw Eriri as nothing more than a creator with a bleak future. Tomoya denied ever saying such a thing. Utaha argued that Eriri wouldn't be able to change her art style, nor would she grow even when faced with a challenge that demanded growth. Instead, she would return without ever trying. Tomoya was confused. Wasn't he also hoping for Eriri to improve? Utaha then directly asked him if he actually wanted Eriri to grow as an artist. It had nothing to do with her personally, but Utaha found herself frustrated. She admitted that she disliked Eriri, but she still respected her more than Tomoya did, even though he was supposed to know her best. That was what irritated Utaha the most. Without another word, she walked away. That night, Eriri messaged Tomoya, saying she hadn't been able to complete anything. She felt completely stuck because she had gotten so used to Utaha's scripts over the past 6 months that she didn't know how to adjust to Tomoya's. Tomoya told her she was overthinking it. It was just a script, after all. Eriri had actually drawn several pages as an experiment, but she wasn't satisfied with them. If she used the same style, she feared it wouldn't fit the tone of Tomoya's writing, so she scrapped everything. Tomoya was shocked. "What do you mean you threw everything away?" Eriri admitted she had never experienced anything like this before. She hadn't made any progress at all. She didn't even understand what was happening to her. Tomoya told her not to put so much pressure on herself and to just draw like she always did. Eriri reassured him that she would meet the deadline and that she would handle this on her own because it was her own problem. Tomoya told her it wasn't her fault, but before he could say anything else, Eriri hung up the phone. With that, she had officially entered the second stage, self-blame. That night, Tomoya even dreamed about Eriri apologizing to him, and the dream startled him awake. By Friday, Tomoya still hadn't heard anything from Eriri. She hadn't contacted him at all. Megumi considered calling her, but it didn't seem like the right time. It was clear that Eriri had now entered the third stage, delayed responses. Tomoya started wondering if they should just cancel the main route altogether. Megumi reminded him that it was the first scenario he had ever written. However, Tomoya replied that it didn't seem all that great, and even if they scrapped it, it wouldn't really matter. Megumi disagreed, saying that Eriri would never accept that decision. She had originally planned to say something encouraging, but seeing Tomoya's attitude at that moment made her hold back. Tomoya was puzzled as to why Megumi had been acting so harsh toward him lately. Megumi told him that if anything happened over the weekend, he had to let her know. Even if it wasn't about Nasokogen, she would still come. Tomoya thanked her. Megumi was still worried about Eriri and hoped she was eating properly, but Tomoya mentioned that she was only eating instant noodles. Megumi hoped Eriri wouldn't get sick. Her excessive concern made Tomoya tease her, saying she sounded like a mom. Megumi was even worried that Eriri might catch a cold since it was colder there than in Tokyo. This made Tomoya recall the time 9 years ago when he went there with Eriri, and it was indeed freezing. Meanwhile, Eriri was sitting on the terrace of her villa, staring blankly into the distance. She had repeatedly failed to draw and still hadn't found the right inspiration. As she gazed at the villa's yard, the first snowfall of the season began. Moments later, the dialogue for the game scenario started flowing naturally in her mind. Inspiration struck, and she suddenly imagined the game's characters standing before her. That midnight, Eriri suddenly called Tomoya, excitedly telling him that it was snowing beautifully at her villa. She also assured him that she was confident she could meet her deadline. Tomoya could hardly believe what he was hearing. Eriri explained that she had just come up with an idea for her drawing style and that she could finally finish everything. She realized that unlike in the art club where objects and backgrounds were drawn together, game illustrations required them to be separated. That difference had been bothering her all along. Tomoya asked if Ariri planned to change her entire drawing style. Ariri confirmed it, saying she would alter everything. First, she would paint the scenes, then scan them to separate the objects from the backgrounds. Tomoya then asked how many pages she had completed so far. Ariri admitted that she was just about to start. Tomoya was shocked, knowing that time was running out, but Ariri confidently claimed that she could draw more than 5 pages a day. Tomoya doubted she could pull it off, but Ariri was determined. As long as Tomoya believed in her, she was sure she could do it. Ariri even admitted that she liked the route Tomoya had written. Even though the happy ending felt a bit forced, she could still feel the joy in it. Because of that, she would finish her work no matter what anyone said. She was determined to complete it. That very night, Ariri started painting while gazing at the scenery outside her villa. Inspiration kept coming as she saw the game characters and their dialogue materializing in her imagination. The happy ending in Tomoya's route was beautiful. The protagonist could bring happiness to both Ruri and Meguri. Ariri could see that happiness unfolding right before her eyes in her mind's vision. She even asked Tomoya to cheer her on by saying that she could do it, that she was amazing, a genius, and that she should hurry up and start drawing. Tomoya simply told her to do whatever she wanted. On Sunday, Ariri called Tomoya to tell him that she had finished everything. However, her voice was so weak that it was clear she wasn't doing well. Moments later, Ariri collapsed. Tomoya panicked, repeatedly calling out her name over the phone. That morning, Ariri woke up from her bed, realizing that it had been a while since she last pushed herself to the limit. She suddenly remembered that it was Monday and that she hadn't sent her illustration files to Tomoya yet. Quickly, she got up to send the files, but as she stepped onto the floor, she accidentally stepped on Tomoya's face, who had been sleeping on the floor. Tomoya screamed and begged her to stop stepping on him. The night before, Tomoya had met with Iori, who introduced him to Akane, the person handling finances for their creative circle. Tomoya greeted Akane and asked what was going on. Iori explained that when Tomoya had called him, he was in a business meeting with Akane, and after hearing about Tomoya's situation, Akane herself had suggested bringing him along. Tomoya felt bad as he had only intended to borrow money from Iori. Iori mentioned that taking a train or taxi would take a long time, especially if he had already missed the last train. So Iori decided to take him straight to Nasukojin. Tomoya explained that Ariri had been isolating herself there and was sick. Since her parents were in England at the time, Tomoya took the initiative to visit her. Iori then asked whether Tomoya had managed to send the final copy of his work to the media. Tomoya replied that worrying about that was not his priority at the moment as Ariri was unwell. Hearing this, Iori felt that Tomoya had changed. He was no longer the same person as before. Tomoya admitted that he was neither intelligent, calm, nor cold like Iori. However, Iori was surprised by how much Tomoya had accomplished. Over 2 megabytes of script, more than 30 songs, and if the illustrations were completed, there would be hundreds of illustrated pages in Tomoya's game. Tomoya had only just realized how massive his project had become. Iori insisted that Tomoya still had time to send the final copy and wondered how he managed to push his team this far. Was his creative circle just for fun? Tomoya firmly stated that he had never treated it as a joke. Iori acknowledged that Tomoya had always been serious from the very beginning. He then argued that Tomoya shouldn't have gone to Nasukojin and should have left this matter to someone else while he stayed home to finish the final copy. To Tomoya, such an approach seemed cold and selfish. He couldn't just leave Ariri's situation to someone else. Meanwhile, Megumi tried to call Tomoya, but he didn't answer. Iori suspected that Tomoya just wanted Ariri to be his and his alone. Tomoya was shocked to hear that remark. Upon arriving at the villa, Tomoya immediately went inside and saw Ariri's scattered illustrations. He was stunned when he found Ariri lying weakly on the floor. Tomoya quickly asked Iori to help him carry her to the bed. Iori then asked Akane to bring in the supplies from the car. Before Iori left, Tomoya thanked him. Iori mentioned that he had contacted a company he was acquainted with, and they were willing to wait until noon. He advised Tomoya to reach out to his friends in Tokyo to finish the final copy. That meant there was still half a day left to work on it, and Iori was confident that Tomoya could pull it off. Tomoya expressed his gratitude, and Iori replied that as long as the problem could be solved with money and connections, it wasn't a big deal for him. That morning, Tomoya told Ariri that she had likely caught the flu and needed to rest. Ariri mentioned that it had been a long time since she last had the flu, but Tomoya reminded her that she used to get sick often. during the Hinadal Festival, the Shichigosen Festival, and even on Christmas. Eriri asked how her illustrations turned out, and Tomoya told her that all 7 pages were great. Eriri was overjoyed. Tomoya then told her that her task was complete and asked her to take a break. Eriri assumed that the game was finished and that everything was going well. She also thought that Tomoya had already inserted her illustrations into the game and integrated them. However, that was not the case at all. Tomoya hadn't even added her illustrations to the game yet. Upon hearing this, Eriri was of course furious with him. Tomoya asked her not to push herself too hard. Eriri urged Tomoya not to waste time to finish it quickly because she knew that he was someone who always gave his all and never gave up. Tomoya replied that he had already made his choice between a sick friend and a looming deadline. Eriri argued that he should have chosen both, but Tomoya said it was already too late. Eriri accused Tomoya of wasting her hard work from the past week and of disregarding the efforts of all the other members over the past 6 months. Tomoya explained that only the final part wouldn't be completed in time for the Winter Comiket, and the rest could still be finished. Even if they had to delay the release, it wouldn't change much. Eriri was disappointed with his decision. It was obvious that Tomoya truly wanted to release the game, especially considering all the hard work the members of Blessing Software had put in together. Eriri called him an idiot and cried her heart out. Tomoya tried to comfort her. Eriri apologized to Tomoya for failing to keep her promise. Tomoya stayed by Eriri's side all day, taking care of her because he was afraid that if he left, she might not make it. At 10 a.m., Tomoya urged Eriri to eat something. He reassured her that missing just a little wouldn't reduce the value of their game, especially since they could still sell 100 copies at the Winter Comiket if they duplicated them themselves. Eriri pointed out that if that were the case, their circle wouldn't be able to defeat Rouge and Izumi. Tomoya told her not to worry about that anymore. Eriri replied that if she didn't, she wouldn't be able to be Tomoya's number 1. Tomoya was puzzled as to why she said that, considering that all of her illustrations were incredible and the best he had seen that year. He even admitted that he got chills when he first saw them. They were realistic yet passionate, beautiful, and sweet. Eriri gathered the courage to ask if her illustrations were better than Izumi's or any other illustrators. Tomoya nodded. She then asked if that meant she was his number 1. Tomoya nodded again. Eriri was ecstatic that she had surpassed Izumi, Michiru, and even Utaha. However, Tomoya flicked her forehead and told her that he never said anything like that. He then urged her to hurry up and eat her porridge. Eriri complained that she preferred instant noodles. That night, Tomoya and Eriri played a game together using Eriri's favorite character, Service. When Tomoya had to choose a gift for Service, he picked a ruby brooch. However, Eriri told him that he should have chosen a ring instead so that he could hear Service's proposal. Tomoya said it would be really strange if Service planned to propose on Christmas. Eriri couldn't accept Tomoya bad-mouthing Service. She told Tomoya that they hadn't changed since childhood, spending all their time indoors watching cartoons and playing games. Tomoya explained that it was because Eriri often got sick back then, just like now. Eriri leaned on Tomoya's shoulder and mentioned that they had to go home tomorrow. Tomoya asked if she was feeling better. Eriri said she was fine and that she would ask her driver to pick her up. She wanted to apologize to the circle members once they got back for not meeting her deadline. Tomoya insisted that he should be the one to apologize since he was the leader of the circle. However, Eriri remained firm, saying that she was the one who got too caught up in quality, which was both her responsibility and her pride. She also felt the need to apologize to Tomoya personally. Tomoya recalled when Eriri had promised to become his number 1, saying she wouldn't apologize to him until she achieved that. On December 31st, the day of the Winter Comiket had arrived. Tomoya and his friends were busy setting up their booth. He encouraged everyone to prepare everything properly since he planned to greet the customers before the event opened. Michiru remarked that, as always, their circle had finished everything at the last minute. Utaha noted that they would have had plenty of time if they had released an early version at the last minute, added a 4-panel comic to the guidebook, or included bonus content in the game. Tomoya argued that when there's extra time, it's tempting to add a few more things. Eriri pointed out that games often include 1 or 2 jokes. Michiru said it was fine since everyone had worked hard, but their booth looked a bit underwhelming compared to others. Utaha explained that it was because their location near the wall was usually reserved for major creative circles that sold thousands of copies, not for a small group quietly selling 100 homemade DVDs. Eriri started to feel offended by Utaha's words. She apologized again for missing her deadline, but Utaha kept bringing it up, making her feel cornered. Utaha told Eriri that she was doing it again, acting overly proud even while apologizing. Michiru also thought Eriri sounded like she was genuinely apologizing but ended up bragging. Eriri admitted that she was extremely proud of her final 7 pages, calling them the best work of Eri Kashiwagi's career. Tomoya sighed and playfully smacked her forehead, saying her overconfidence was embarrassing. Megumi then spoke up, saying that Eriri had done nothing wrong and that everyone knew how hard she had worked for their game. If their circle failed, then all of them had failed. Utaha agreed that Eriri had indeed worked hard and produced her best work ever. Even Michiru couldn't imagine how she had managed to pull it off. Eriri apologized to Megumi, who found it strange that she was the one receiving an apology. Tomoya mentioned that Megumi had worked hard as well, but Megumi asked him to drop the subject. Later, Tomoya and Eriri visited Iori's booth. Iori greeted them and asked why they had come to their rival's stand. Tomoya told him that he didn't see Iori as a rival, especially since he had helped him so much. Eriri admitted she didn't remember everything clearly from before but sincerely thanked him. Iori felt uncomfortable and asked them not to treat him like a good person. He still had a reputation to uphold in front of his own circle members. Tomoya was puzzled about what exactly Iori was trying to protect. Eriri then approached Izumi and bowed to her, acknowledging Izumi's success at the Winter Comiket. She admitted that Izumi had defeated her and even surpassed Blessing Software's circle. Izumi was surprised by that reaction. Eriri said that if she did not accept her defeat this time, she would never be able to move forward. She also admitted that she was actually afraid of Izumi even up until that moment. Izumi was confused by that statement, and Eriri admitted that Izumi had quickly caught up to her and even surpassed her. Eriri was also afraid that Izumi would far exceed her, perhaps without even realizing it, and that was why Eriri had acted mean toward her. Eriri sincerely apologized, and besides that, there was another reason. Eriri said that from now on, she would not lose. She then handed Izumi a DVD of their game. Eriri stated that if Izumi continued to improve, it meant she had to become even better, and she was determined to make that happen. Izumi accepted the game DVD that Eriri gave her. Eriri told her that next time they would compete again at the next event. Izumi gladly accepted the challenge, but Eriri then accused Izumi of being arrogant and told her that a winner should not act like that. From a distance, Iori and Tomoya watched them. Iori guessed that Izumi and Eriri had finally come to understand each other. Tomoya, however, found it odd that Iori, who had instigated their rivalry, was now saying such things. Iori then asked Tomoya how he could be so relaxed when their game was currently going viral. There were tons of online reviews after Tomoya released the early version of the game. With the involvement of writer Yutaka Kasumi and creator Eri Kashiwagi, Tomoya's game was becoming highly anticipated. Just then, Akane arrived and borrowed the DVD that Iori was holding. The members of Rouge and Rouge greeted Akane enthusiastically as she had come to check out something interesting. When Tomoya and Eriri returned to their booth, they were astonished to see a large crowd gathered in front of their stand. Michiru called out to them excitedly. That was how the Winter Comiket went. Every copy of Blessing Software's game, Cherry Blessing, sold out in less than 30 minutes. After the event ended, they packed up and left the building. Tomoya noticed Megumi carrying her suitcase and offered to help, but she declined. As they walked together, Tomoya apologized, but Megumi said it was not anyone's fault. At a nearby intersection, Tomoya invited Megumi to join the celebration dinner, but Megumi chose to head home instead and turned toward her route. Tomoya pleaded, saying that it was just a simple dinner, but Megumi still refused to join. Tomoya then asked if Megumi was still upset with him for not including the full version of their game at Winter Comiket, and he sincerely apologized. Megumi asked why Tomoya had not told her about the deadline, about Eriri, or about the Winter Comiket situation. She wondered why Tomoya had not shared anything with her, even though she had committed to the same project as he had and would not have opposed him. She questioned why Tomoya had chosen to keep everything to himself instead of confiding in her. After all, she had previously told him that she was willing to set aside her Saturdays and Sundays to help him. Megumi admitted that Tomoya had made the right decision, but she still could not forgive him or accept what had happened just yet. Tomoya noticed that Megumi was not crying, but precisely because of that, her anger felt like a painful slap. That day, Tomoya called Eriri to let her know that they needed an additional 5,000 copies of the game DVDs because the 1,000 copies they had prepared were already sold out. Tomoya admitted that the retail stores had been a huge help. Eriri noted that the shortage of products at the Winter Comiket seemed to have been compensated for. Tomoya added that as soon as people found out the illustrations were drawn by Eri Kashiwagi, Cherry Blessing immediately became the center of attention. Eriri smiled, even though they never intended to hide that information. Tomoya also mentioned that netizens became even more hyped when they found out the scenario was written by Yutaka Kasumi. Aririri suspected that Utaha herself had spread the news. Tomoya responded, asking why Aririri would say something like that, considering he and Utaha had worked together to complete the game. Aririri laughed, saying she was just joking, and that Tomoya also deserved praise for his scenario. Tomoya mentioned that the route he had chosen received mixed reviews. Aririri said that didn't matter because she personally loved it. Tomoya pointed out that the competition with other creative circles wasn't over yet, and he would continue promoting Cherry Blessing. Just as he was about to ask Aririri for something, she immediately guessed that he wanted a thank you illustration. Aririri assured him that she was already working on it. Tomoya said he would update their circle's website to boost sales even further. Aririri smiled, commenting that Tomoya was starting to sell things just like Iori. After ending the call, Aririri went back to working on her illustration. The next morning, as Tomoya got off the train, Utaha suddenly greeted him and started chatting while they walked to school together. Naturally, the students around them stared in surprise. Utaha congratulated Tomoya on the additional game orders. Tomoya thanked her, saying that now he could properly compensate her for all her help. However, Utaha refused, saying that this was just a high school creative circle. Tomoya argued that this was precisely why they needed to divide the earnings fairly among all members. Utaha sarcastically pointed out that Tomoya was both the leader and the producer, which basically made him human trash. She then asked why he didn't just run off with all the money, live extravagantly, and leave behind nothing but the angry curses of the other members. Tomoya, confused, asked if something had happened with one of Utaha's previous producers. He also found it odd that Utaha was walking and talking with him on the way to school, something that had never happened in their 2 years together. Utaha explained that she was about to graduate soon and would be parting ways with Tomoya. She wanted to remember everything from their 3 years together, including moments like this. Suddenly, Aririri came running from behind and forcefully pulled them apart. She angrily asked why Tomoya had left without her, especially since she had stopped by his house that morning. Tomoya pointed out that Aririri had never done that in the past 8 years. Frustrated, Aririri insisted that things were different now. Utaha then asked what exactly had changed, but Aririri couldn't come up with an answer. Utaha teased that since Aririri had caused chaos at the Winter Comiket, she should take responsibility by serving Tomoya, escorting him to school every morning or even staying by his side in his bedroom. Aririri fired back, saying she didn't want to hear that from an old lady like Utaha, who was about to graduate and was desperate to create some cliché memories. Tomoya intervened, telling them they were ruining their own reputations. Their argument quickly became the center of attention among the students arriving at school. Utaha didn't mind being in the spotlight, but she turned to Aririri and asked, "What about you? What will happen when everyone finds out that you're actually a cowardly, perverted comic artist?" Aririri realized that, yes, she was a maniac and an illustrator of erotic comics, but she was definitely not a coward like Utaha claimed. Tomoya tried to calm her down. In class, Yoshihiko couldn't believe that Aririri and Utaha were fighting over Tomoya. He was baffled and wondered if Tomoya was the protagonist of a high school harem anime. Tomoya suddenly realized how annoying the best friend character in harem anime could be. Yoshihiko teased that Tomoya had landed a critical hit right before Valentine's Day. Suddenly, Megumi entered the classroom and Tomoya and Yoshihiko greeted her. Tomoya told Megumi that the next circle meeting would be on Friday and asked if she could attend. However, Megumi dodged the question by pointing out that the school bell had rung. Yoshihiko commented that Tomoya's wife was really mad about this morning's chaos, but the issue was not that simple. That day, Tomoya and Iori met at a cafe. Out of nowhere, Iori handed Tomoya a Valentine's chocolate. Tomoya was completely caught off guard by Iori's gesture. Iori told him not to be shy as they had always been close friends. Then, laughing, he revealed that he was just messing around. The chocolate was actually from Izumi. Tomoya quickly grabbed it, frustrated that Iori had to make such a big deal out of it. Iori explained that Izumi had really wanted to give it to Tomoya in person, but she was busy preparing for entrance exams for a public school. Tomoya asked Iori to pass on his regards to Izumi. Iori then inquired if Tomoya was busy with his next project and whether he had already signed up for the summer art fair. Iori wanted Tomoya to participate as he still had unfinished business with him. Ever since Tomoya released his game, he had become Iori's rival. While Iori admitted that his sales numbers were still higher, Tomoya's games seemed to be getting better reviews. Tomoya credited his success to having Eri Kashiwagi and Yutaka Kasumi in his circle, saying that as long as they had strong content, they wouldn't lose. Iri was confident that his circle would win if Eriri and Utaha's skills remained the same as before. However, their recent growth had surprised him. Iri admitted that he had never been moved by a game's story and visuals the way he was with Tomoya's. Tomoya was shocked to learn that Iri had actually played his game and not just him. All of his circle members had played it and enjoyed it. Tomoya hadn't expected that at all and sincerely thanked Iri. Iri then mentioned that some of them might hold a grudge against Tomoya since he had revealed to them that Tomoya had written the final happy ending route himself. Tomoya was confused. How did Iri know that? Iri then revealed that he owned one of only 5 copies of Little Rhapsody 2, a project Tomoya had worked on with Izumi 3 years ago. Tomoya was completely shocked when Iri showed him the book. Iri pointed out that Tomoya's writing style hadn't changed much and still hadn't fully matured. He teased Tomoya, waving the book around. Tomoya, in desperation, offered to buy it for 5,000 yen, just so he could bury it forever. As they parted ways, Tomoya begged Iri never to show that book to anyone. Iri left him with some advice. No matter if it was the winter or summer art fair, Tomoya should keep pushing his circle forward. He also needed to hold on to Eriri and Utaha. That night, Tomoya wondered if he could start a second project for Blessing Software. He questioned whether it was okay for him to interfere with Utaha's novel writing any further, and whether he had the right to push Eriri even harder. Tomoya tried calling Megumi, but she ignored his call. That day was Valentine's Day. In the morning, Eriri deliberately stopped by Tomoya's house so they could go to school together. She handed him a Valentine's chocolate. Tomoya's response was complete silence. Eriri was puzzled. Was this really the first time Tomoya had ever received chocolates on Valentine's Day? Tomoya was simply surprised because Eriri wasn't acting as over the top as usual. Normally, she would have said something a little more aggressive. Eriri was curious about what kind of image Tomoya actually had of her. Tomoya pointed out that this was the second time he had received chocolates from Eriri, and before he knew it, 9 years had already passed. Hearing that, Eriri blushed, while Tomoya found her reaction odd. Was the tsundere supposed to act differently? As they walked to school together, Tomoya mentioned that he had a lunch appointment with Utaha that day. He also told Eriri that Utaha's latest novel had just been released and he wanted to give her a direct review. Eriri commented that Utaha sure had found a great excuse to meet Tomoya on Valentine's Day. Tomoya suggested that Eriri read Utaha's work too so they could discuss it together. Eriri admitted that she had already read it 3 times. According to Tomoya, Utaha's writing style really stood out this time, and her techniques felt incredibly smooth. However, he didn't want to talk about it any further since he needed to share his thoughts with Utaha first. Eriri noted that Tomoya was really lucky this year, getting so many chocolates. Now all that was left was Megumi's chocolate. Tomoya instantly fell silent. Eriri figured that Tomoya still hadn't made up with Megumi, even though nearly 2 months had passed. If they were just friends, they should have reconciled by now. But as it turned out, the situation really was that complicated. Eriri offered to talk to Megumi on his behalf, but Tomoya refused. He insisted that he had to solve the problem on his own. Eriri pointed out that if this was about the winter comic hit, then she was partly responsible too. Tomoya quickly reassured her that it wasn't her fault at all. What mattered most was that Eriri focused on her illustrations. Eriri asked him to wait just a little longer. Tomoya didn't mind since they hadn't officially announced anything yet. Eriri pleaded for a bit more time, saying she would soon regain her motivation. Tomoya gave her 2 weeks. Then Eriri leaned on him and told him to forget about deadlines for now. They should just relax for a bit. Tomoya replied that she could finish it whenever she wanted. Eriri then asked where Tomoya and Utaha were meeting later. Tomoya said he would tell her, but only if she told him what she planned to do with that information first. During lunch break, Tomoya met Utaha in the audiovisual room. He congratulated her on the release of her novel, Hectopascal of True Love. He even admitted to staying up all night to reread it 3 times. He thought Yutaka Kasumi's writing hadn't changed at all. Her style and story flow felt even smoother than before. Though he wasn't sure if he was qualified to comment on writing techniques, the overall tone of the novel still had Utaha's unmistakable charm. Tomoya also told her that he would definitely attend her book signing event next week. Utaha teased him, saying she could sign something for him right then and there if that's what he wanted. However, Tomoya clarified that he wanted an autograph from Yutaka Kasumi, author, not Utaha, his friend. Utaha smirked and said she would personally sign her name as Utaha all over his body right then and there. Tomoya shuddered at the thought that Utaha handed him a small package. Tomoya didn't understand what it meant. Wutaha mentioned that they had already spent many nights together. She then shouted that those nights were meant for writing scripts and plots, not for anything else. Wutaha stated that starting tomorrow, she planned to stop going to school. Tomoya asked if she had already decided which university she would enter. Wutaha explained that she still had to write the second volume of her novel, so before starting college, she would focus on continuing her novel first. Tomoya then asked what she planned to do once she started college. Wutaha said she would probably work on the Hectopascal series first, since Sonoko was also very enthusiastic about its anime adaptation. Tomoya then asked about their circle blessing software. He assured Wutaha that he wouldn't ask her to write all the routes like before, even if she could only manage one route or just a short bonus story. She could work on it whenever she had time. Tomoya also asked if Wutaha would be willing to join their next project. Wutaha, in turn, asked if Tomoya had already come up with an idea for the next project. Tomoya asked for a week to think about it. Wutaha then asked who Tomoya planned to assign as the illustrator for the next project. Would he entrust it to Ariuri again? And was he sure he could really convince her? According to Wutaha, Ariuri hadn't drawn anything at all that year. Tomoya was confident that Ariuri had drawn something, but she probably hadn't decided on the finishing touches yet. Wutaha pointed out that it had already been a month past the agreed deadline. If that were the case, it meant she had been negligent, and the one enabling such behavior was none other than Tomoya himself. Tomoya reasoned that Ariuri had been sick last year, but Wutaha countered that Ariuri had already recovered by then and should have had no other distractions. If she still couldn't draw, it meant she was no longer able to produce any work. Wutaha was puzzled as to why Tomoya was so lenient with Ariuri. His attitude might make Ariuri happy, but as a creator, she wouldn't want that. Deep down, Wutaha wanted to collaborate with Ariuri again. She wanted to create something that could surpass Cherry Blessing. When class ended, the teacher reminded the students to go straight home and not wander around since it was going to snow. As Tomoya packed up, he noticed that Megumi had already left the classroom. On his way home, the snow started falling heavily. Tomoya saw Megumi sitting alone inside a cafe through the window. He sent her a message and felt relieved when she immediately read it and left soon after. Tomoya then sent another message inviting Megumi to meet on Friday after school in the audiovisual room to discuss their circle's future plans. That night, Tomoya opened his game and noticed that the expression of the character Meguri had changed drastically. This reminded him of how Megumi genuinely wanted to create the game. He also recalled the time Megumi suggested that he play the game directly when he was struggling to choose between Wutaha's two scripts. He remembered how excited Megumi was to help him implement the game's script. Tomoya wondered why Megumi was working so hard to create the game. She was even willing to stay up late to help him, cook for him, and cheer him on. Tomoya suddenly felt overwhelmed with emotions. He wanted to apologize to Megumi. That night, Tomoya began drafting a new plan for their next project. It seemed that he had finally decided to figure out how to raise a boring girlfriend. On Friday, just before the school day ended, Megumi was still unsure whether she should attend the circle meeting or not. Seeing Tomoya asleep at his desk, she packed her things to leave, but Tomoya suddenly stopped her at the classroom door. He invited her to the circle meeting, adding that she had completely fallen for his act of pretending to be asleep. Once they arrived at the audiovisual room, Megumi asked where Ariuri and Wutaha were. Tomoya told her that they wouldn't be attending the meeting. He then locked the room, making Megumi a little uneasy, wondering if Tomoya was about to do something to her. However, it turned out that he just wanted to present his project plan through the projector because his home printer had run out of ink. Tomoya explained that capturing the innocence and charm of the female protagonist through changes in attitude and expressions when expressing emotions was the key to creating a fictional character that could truly make Megumi fall in love. He admitted that from the start he wanted to create a game where the female protagonist had an irresistible charm, one that could make players' hearts race. However, the result turned out to be quite different from what he had originally envisioned. Their previous game had a touching romantic theme, and while he wasn't dissatisfied with the story, especially with Wutaha and Ariuri's contributions, it had been a commercial success. Megumi then asked what exactly the documents Tomoya was showing her were. Tomoya asked if she hadn't read the title on the first page. It was their next game proposal. Megumi questioned why Tomoya was showing it to her, and Tomoya grew frustrated that Megumi had only skimmed through the proposal he had poured his heart into. The reason was obvious. The female protagonist of the game was Meguri, a character based on Megumi herself. Megumi then asked if Tomoya really thought she would be happy about being involved in the project. Tomoya admitted he didn't know for sure, but without Megumi, the project wouldn't happen. Even if the other members participated, the game simply couldn't be made without her. Unfortunately, Megumi felt that Tomoya didn't need to insist so much on that point because being the model for the female protagonist wasn't a significant role, it was almost meaningless. Tomoya admitted there were some things he regretted. Their circle had incredibly talented members, and they had made an amazing game. Everyone had done their part well. Iriri, Utaha, Michiru, and Megumi had all given their best efforts until the very end. Megumi agreed, saying that since everyone had worked hard, there was nothing left for her to do and no reason for her to continue. Tomoya, however, insisted that he still hadn't managed to bring Megumi to that place. Megumi didn't understand what he meant by that place. Tomoya explained that that place was a destination worthy of their hard work, a place that would bring Megumi true joy from the bottom of her heart. That was why he felt sad about it and why his enthusiasm had faded. He felt like he was the only one who hadn't given his all. In the final moments, he had stopped, run away, and remained frozen in place. That was why Tomoya wanted revenge. This time, he wouldn't wake Megumi from her dream. He would take her to the finish line. He would make it impossible for her to quit being a game creator or an otaku. He also admitted that making her the female protagonist was just a trick, a deception. But this time, his only wish was to reach the peak together with Megumi. That was why he had no choice but to create a proposal compelling enough to draw Megumi into the project. Megumi then asked why Tomoya made a proposal that was nothing more than his disgusting fantasy. She questioned whether something like that could actually make her interested in getting involved. Tomoya insisted that only he could bring a revolutionary project to the world of attractive games, but Megumi thought what Tomoya wanted to do was still within the realm of reason. Tomoya was confused. Had Megumi even read the proposal he had painstakingly written? The core of the proposal was to combine great ideas that had never been seen or even imagined before. Megumi pointed out that this was exactly the problem. In her opinion, Tomoya wanted to create such a large-scale game with a team like theirs. Checking the proposal, Megumi noted that it looked as if only one person was planning, writing the script, and directing everything. Tomoya clarified that Megumi would assist the person in charge of planning and directing. Megumi outright refused, saying it was too much trouble. Tomoya argued that in a project that would revolutionize the world of attractive games, there was no time for complaints. He sincerely begged Megumi to be the female protagonist and his right-hand woman for their circle. He even went as far as bowing before her, pleading for her to stay by his side and help move their circle forward. Megumi then asked Tomoya if he had already told Iriri that he wanted to make her the female protagonist again. Tomoya admitted he hadn't told Iriri yet. Megumi questioned whether that was okay and whether Tomoya could make such a decision without informing Iriri. Tomoya confessed that honestly he didn't want to ask, but he was curious. Had Megumi been mad at him all this time because he had been so close to Iriri lately? Did it make her upset? Tomoya trembled as he waited for Megumi's response. Megumi, however, was bewildered by Tomoya's words. She asked if he really thought she had feelings for him. Hearing this, Tomoya felt embarrassed and tried to hide his face from Megumi. Megumi then asked if Tomoya had forgotten everything he had done to her. Tomoya responded that in attractive games, there were moments like this, where the female protagonist falls in love despite nothing significant happening. Megumi started to understand perhaps that was why someone like Tomoya, who didn't understand the real world, made games like that. Tomoya admitted he understood now and asked Megumi to forgive him. Megumi also wanted to forget the moment that had just passed. Tomoya apologized for what happened last year, for not telling Megumi and for not reaching out to her. He also apologized for failing to be her friend. However, he also thanked her. At that time, he was truly happy because Megumi loved Blessing Software more than she loved him. She loved it so much that she couldn't forgive him for giving up so easily at the Winter Art Convention. And that feeling of hers made him incredibly happy. Because of that, he acknowledged that he had hurt Megumi. Hearing those words, Megumi was touched and her eyes welled up with tears. Tomoya thanked her once again and apologized. Megumi could no longer hold back her tears. She cried even though she had been trying to suppress them all this time. No matter how many times Tomoya apologized, she wouldn't feel happy. Tomoya smiled, but Megumi said his behavior only made her angrier. Megumi then asked, weren't they friends? Weren't Iriri, Utaha, and Michiru their friends too? She said that if they were truly friends, then there shouldn't be any secrets, hidden feelings, or decisions made alone. Whatever the problem was, they should have talked about it first. Tomoya admitted that Megumi was right and that he was the one at fault. Megumi said their circle was far more enjoyable than she had expected, which was why she had ignored Tomoya and the others for the past 2 months. But in reality, it had been incredibly difficult for her. Tomoya apologized again, but to Megumi, his apologies felt insincere. Megumi and Tomoya went to the supermarket together. Megumi asked if Tomoya was sure that the setup would work. Tomoya admitted that it might be difficult at first, but eventually they would get used to it. Megumi said that someone like her was not suited to be the right-hand person of their circle, especially since the other members were incredibly talented. Tomoya reassured her not to worry about that because the leader of the circle wasn't that great either. Megumi then asked Tomoya to grab some onions. Tomoya questioned why they needed onions, and Megumi explained that she planned to make curry for dinner. Since their circle meeting would likely go on until late at night, Megumi decided to cook dinner. After buying some groceries, Megumi also bought some underwear. Megumi then asked why Tomoya planned to have Utaha write the first route. Tomoya explained that it was because Utaha would soon start college and be busy with her novels. Megumi pointed out that last year, when Utaha was busy with her college entrance exams at her novel, Tomoya still pressured her to write all the routes for their game. Tomoya was confident that this would be Utaha's greatest work, even if it was only one route. Megumi then asked if the quality of the rest of the script wouldn't suffer if Tomoya wrote them instead. Tomoya insisted that they had to keep moving forward. Megumi realized that it was their circle's leader who had to work the hardest. After paying for her underwear, Megumi asked Tomoya to lend her some clothes when they got to his house. Tomoya was surprised to hear that Megumi was planning to stay over in his room that night. On their way home, Megumi asked if Iriri still hadn't recovered. Tomoya admitted that at the moment, it would be difficult to ask Iriri to handle the illustrations for all the characters. Megumi then asked if Tomoya had any other illustrators in mind who were as skilled as Iriri and hadn't joined any circles yet. That question felt like a harsh reality check. When they arrived at Tomoya's house, Megumi asked where his parents were. Tomoya explained that they had gone to a funeral in Nagano and wouldn't be back until the day after tomorrow. While cooking together in the kitchen, Tomoya admitted that Cherry Blessing was indeed a good game they had created, but it wasn't the game he had originally wanted to make. The game turned out well, but not because of his ideas. Megumi pointed out that perhaps Tomoya had been too influenced by Utaha and Iriri. That was why, for their next project, Tomoya wanted to return to the original vision of Blessing Software. He wanted to create a game that could capture people's interest without relying on excessive elements. He wanted the game to focus on its characters while delivering a touching story in a simple way, drawing players in with its unique charm. Megumi handed Tomoya a taste of the food she had cooked, asking if the flavor was right. Tomoya then talked about how he wanted the next project to center around communication with the female protagonist and incorporate a system where players could manage schedules, monitor the protagonist's health, have 3 dating locations, give gifts, and even tap the screen to kiss the girls. That night, Tomoya and Megumi sat down for dinner together, enjoying Megumi's cooking. Megumi admitted that a game like that sounded impressive, and Tomoya added that he also wanted to create an adventure game with a rich story, something that would become his signature style. He then asked for Megumi's opinion, but she wasn't sure what to say yet. Tomoya insisted that it was important, saying he would talk about the girl he liked with enthusiasm. Megumi pointed out that Tomoya didn't seem to feel embarrassed when it came to fictional characters. Tomoya admitted that it might be difficult and the result might even turn out worse than before. There was a chance it wouldn't sell well, and fans might criticize it. Suddenly, Megumi reached out and wiped some sauce off Tomoya's cheek. After dinner, Tomoya showed Megumi some examples of the kind of game he envisioned, something similar to an ordinary high school romance. There would be no reincarnation memories, chronic illnesses, or time travel. There wouldn't even be a parallel world, just daily conversations, small events, and the adorable antics of the female protagonist. Megumi asked if games like the ones Tomoya showed her already existed. However, according to Tomoya, there were 2 key elements missing. First, the in-game conversations, the dialogue between the female protagonist and the player, were incredibly boring, cringeworthy, and overly scripted. Second, the reactions of the female protagonist were way too predictable. Whether it was a tsundere, a little sister type, or a cool older girl, they all followed the same generic patterns. While Tomoya admitted that tropes were important, he believed that female protagonists should feel more human. Their reactions should change depending on how much time had passed and their mood at the moment. Their attitudes should evolve along with their feelings, and the way old friends talk should naturally be different. That's why a slow, natural approach was needed so that players could connect with them more easily. Tomoya insisted that female protagonists should be treated like real people by introducing more variety into their interactions. Hearing that, Megumi pointed out something ironic. If human relationships do change over time, depending on how much time is spent together and how feelings develop, then shouldn't his own attitude have changed as well? She was frustrated that Tomoya hadn't learned anything from the past. If he truly understood what he was saying, then why hadn't he changed when it came to their relationship? They had spent so much time together, grown closer, yet he still acted the same. Megumi started getting angry, realizing that Tomoya had never truly understood anything. He kept claiming that female protagonists were just like real people, but Megumi was a real person too. Then there was the title of his proposal, How to Raise a Boring Girlfriend. Megumi couldn't understand why Tomoya would call his own character boring and then use that as the title of the game. Tomoya quickly promised to change it if Megumi didn't like it. Even while Megumi was soaking in the bathtub, she kept discussing the matter with Tomoya over the phone. She doubted whether he could really make such a good game, and Tomoya reassured her that he would do his best. But to Megumi, Tomoya lacked awareness of the very issues he was trying to address. She suspected that Tomoya was actually trying to make a game even more difficult than before. Tomoya urged her to relax while taking a bath instead of scolding him. Megumi shot back that she was acting like this because of him. Tomoya repeatedly apologized, but to Megumi, his apologies felt insincere. They ended up talking late into the night. Tomoya mentioned that he should focus on gathering the other members first. Megumi then asked whether Utaha was still sticking around even after graduating. Tomoya could only express his gratitude toward Utaha. Megumi also asked if Eriri had recovered yet, but Tomoya wasn't sure. Right now, all they could do was wait and hope for the best. Megumi questioned if it was really okay for Tomoya to be so worried about this when he himself still seemed lost. In response, Tomoya told Megumi to just go to sleep already. Tomoya found Megumi's behavior that day a bit strange. Megumi then asked him to forget about her odd behavior by tomorrow. She took out a chocolate bar from her bag and handed it to Tomoya. Even though it was a little late, she still wanted him to have it. Tomoya accepted the chocolate, and with that, they went to bed.